Hi, I'm just going to go through a summary of a book by Daniel Kahneman, which is called Thinking Fast and Slow. The book is a summary of the lifetime work of the author and contains a lot of wisdom, I think, about human behavior. Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for his work on prospect theory, which, believe it or not, is a branch of economics now. Kahneman says much of human behavior is nominally controlled by the conscious part of the brain, but in fact there is an unconscious part which is making quick decisions without bothering the conscious part of the mind. It's similar to the reflex reaction where messages only travel as far as the spinal column before getting a quick reaction. He calls them System 1, which is the unconscious mind at work, which makes most of the decisions without bothering the conscious mind, and System 2, which is a part of the brain that thinks it's in control all of the time and is responsible for reasoning and logic. And here are a few of the points that he makes. Now, this book is quite dense, as in there's a lot of reading in it. So if you do read it, you'll see what I'm talking about. Most of Kahneman's theories are supported by research. They're not just his opinion. So it's quite good in that respect. So there's a thing called priming, which takes place when you hear one word and another is suggested or is more suggestible to you. For example, if you hear the word eat, E-A-T, you will more likely fill in the missing letter from S-O blank P as soup rather than soap. Another point he makes is if people believe they're being watched, they behave better. An experiment was carried out in a kitchen where there was an honesty box to pay for tea and coffee. The amounts paid in by people that used the kitchen were 3 times higher in weeks where experimenters put up pictures of a pair of eyes rather than pictures of flowers, which they had every second week. So in the weeks that they had the eyes, picture of the eyes, the collections were 3 times as high. Experiments have shown that statements written in bold are more believable than statements written in plain text, and this has an application. If you want your statement to be believed, you should put it in bold rather than plain text. If what you say is more memorable, for example, because it rhymes, people will think it's more insightful. So the phrase woes unite foes was gauged to be more insightful than the phrase woes unite enemies, although the meaning is exactly the same. If System 2, which is the conscious part of the brain, is disrupted, then people found it more difficult to detect false statements. For example, if you asked people to remember a series of numbers and then asked them to read true or false statements where the answer is obviously false, people found it more difficult to detect the false statements. So System 2 can be disrupted. People have too much faith in small samples, and Daniel Kahneman proved that even statisticians had too much faith in small samples, including him. But when he tested other statisticians, he found the same. People in general are loss adverse. In other words, losses loom larger than gains. In experiments, people wanted a 1.5 to 2.5 times gain to offset a loss of 1. So if you were asked to take a bet where you could lose €100, you would need on average to win between 150 to 250 before you will think of a loss or a potential loss of €100. Kahneman says that if people are presented with puzzles in normal print and font, people tend to make mistakes. However, if the font or the printing is blurry, only way smaller, it's about 1/3 less of people make a mistake. And the reason is that if print is not clear, people have to engage their conscious mind and they take their time on problems. There's an effect called anchoring. So, for example, if you know next to nothing about trees in California and you are asked whether a redwood can be taller than 1,200 feet, you might infer that 1,200 feet is a reasonable height for a redwood tree to be. That's called anchoring. And whether the number 1200 is known to be relevant or not, it does have an effect on the answers that people give. So even if you know that 1200 feet is an outrageous height for a redwood tree, it's still gone into your brain as it has been anchored in there. The last thing I would say that Kahneman, one of the very good points he makes is simple statistical rules are superior to intuitive judgments in almost every sphere of life. People resist this conclusion because they think it's cold-blooded or mechanistic, but there's a thing called the halo effect where first impressions can cloud later judgments. So, for example, if you're interviewing candidates for a position, sometimes if someone makes a good impression at the start, it can cloud your judgment later on because you want them to do well. But if you apply some sort of system to that, it does work out better, when you're interviewing. That's for example. At the back of the book, there's the full text on prospect theory, which was cited in the decision to award the 2002 Nobel Prize in Economics to Daniel Kahneman. Prospect theory, if you don't know what that is, and I didn't, it proves that people are not rational beings who make every decision based on logic, like economists would have you believe. Instead of that, people are actually just unpredictable. So prospect theory tries to explain their behavior. All right. Hope that was useful, and see you again. Thanks. Bye bye.